Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Lorgar's discovery, Lorgar's Betrayal in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Index Asteroutes, Raven Guard. Origins. The scattering of the Prim marches through the 19th pod to the surface of Lycius, a desolate moon of the planet Kievar that was at the time being used as a prison for political dissidents and other criminals, all used as slave labor by the ruling tech guilds of Nabrik, Kievar's capital, to mine the world. Yet Corvus Corax, as he would be named in mockery of a legend about a raven that would free Lycius from the tech guilds, would not long stay on Lycius, being quickly found by the prison overseers and brought down to Nabrik. He was immediately recognized as superhuman, and so the tech priests who ruled Kievar chose to raise him to serve them as an assassin, perhaps even, someday, to take his place among their council, even as they tried to study his blood to unlock the secrets of the Emperor's craft. In this last task they would succeed only in the smallest part, though even that, to them, recouped their investment with interest. The man who was Corax's main teacher, and to some extent foster father, was Das, a tech guild leader who emphasized to his peers the need to ensure Corax's loyalty by treating him well. From him Corax learned the science of Kievar, fallen as it was compared to the wonder of the golden age of technology, and made his own contributions to it. But all in all, Corax's upbringing was a solitary role, the Primarch being indoctrinated from a young age towards his role as a spy and assassin, particularly after his wraith-slipping ability to go unnoticed was discovered. He was trained to be distant, and to suppress emotional connections with those he listened to and at times pretended to befriend. It worked, for a time. But Corax began to doubt, over time, that the tech guilds were truly in the right in the conflict. Besides which, he rather quickly found that Das had him going on missions against other tech guilds as often as against dissenters. He first spoke of his doubts to Das, who shrugged and said that the conflict was to him not ideological, that the only ideal he truly held to was the progress of knowledge, and that the rest of Kievar's tyranny was necessary to maintain that ideal while keeping Das and the other guild masters in power. Though perhaps, Das conceded, not all of it. It did not take much persuasion for Das to agree to send Corax only against other tech guilds' agents, and in the places where he could maximize damage, and through that, and connections with remaining resistant cells, Corax ensured Das and himself achieved control of the entire planet. He waged a campaign of terror, setting back industrial output greatly but finding improvised solutions, and in the end Das was the only guild master of Kievar. Das hesitated at first to bring about the reforms he had promised Corax, but Corax's knife spring at his neck quickly forced him to reconsider. Not knowledge alone, father. Knowledge and freedom. Any other ideals can be twisted, survival into torment, justice into destruction, happiness into mindless bliss, and ambition into all shapes of hell. But so long as we have knowledge and freedom both, humanity's legacy will never fail. Corvus Corax. Kievar rebuilt, and the prisons of Lycius were metaphorically thrown open. Yet while Corax in practice ruled the system, he remained distant from his people. He walked among them more often than they believed, but invisibly, listening rather than speaking. And when he acted, it was abrupt and unexplained. Corax had saved Kievar from tyranny, yet its people saw him much as the Nostrumans saw Konrad Kurz. Corax let that be, focusing as much on the reforms as on his own continuation of the Genesmith's work, seeking obsessively to unravel the mystery of his own origin, and then, even as small-scale democracy began to be implemented throughout the system at last, in a move few attributed to the one they called Das's shadow, the Imperium came to Kievar. The Great Crusade. The Emperor of Mankind came to Kievar personally, and after a full day of private discussion, Corax swore allegiance at sunset, for he knew that the Emperor's ideals aligned a great deal with his own. Kievar became a world of the Imperium, and on Lycius, Corax and Mechanicum engineers led the construction of the Raven's Pier, which would become the fortress monastery of the 19th Legion. The Mechanicum in particular was a subject of fascination to Corax, and as many of his early years in the Sol system after contact were spent on Mars as on Terra. From the tech priests he learned of the fallen Golden Age the tech guilds of Kievar had retained only legends of, though he was disappointed that the Mechanicum in truth did not know much more. From the Mechanicum's archives, his inborn intuition derived from the Emperor's knowledge, and experimentation in the areas neither covered, he scrambled to unravel the secrets of the universe, with as much time as he had, for duty called. The Mechanicum's strict organization, he had less fondness for, and indeed some records say he chose to leave Mars and take command of the 19th Legion after a spat with a high-ranking tech priest on the matter of servitors. The Pale Nomads, Corax found, were a legion much in their Primarch's image, their tactics swift, silent, and brutal, and their relation with the other legions distant. Horus, for instance, refused to fight alongside them after a campaign in which their auxiliaries far exceeded Horus's orders in putting down a minor rebellion, needlessly killing tens of thousands. Upon meeting his Gene sons, Corax jokingly proposed renaming them the Raven Guard in honor of the species that provided the ultimate origin to his own name, but the suggestion was taken seriously, and was instated before the error was noted, an understandable error, perhaps, as Corax was never one for quips, and the Pale Nomads had even less of a tradition of them. To the Imperium at large, it seemed little changed in the operation of the 19th Legion due to their reunion with their Primarch. And change, indeed, was slow. But even the early Raven Guard, under a Primarch known at the time as the Omniscia's Shadow, by everyone except actual Mechanicum adepts, were noted for far greater consideration for the lives and rights of conquered civilian populations than the Pale Nomads, as well as being less often deployed to repress insurgency within imperial borders. While Horus's first meeting with Corax did not go well, Lupercal did withdraw his refusal to fight alongside the 19th 5 years after it, possibly due to hearing of a complaint by Kurs about their insufficient brutality. And despite Corax's misgivings, he also maintained far closer ties to the Mechanicum than his predecessor Legion Masters, leading to the Raven Guard being always equipped with the best in armament suiting their combat doctrine of stealth and speed, in exchange for the Omniscia's Shadow making a point of aiding the quest for knowledge as a main strategic goal, something that he would likely have done anyhow. Over time, as the Terrans in the 19th grew fewer, both those trends became more extreme, bolstered, perhaps, by Corax's discussions with his brothers, particularly Jagatai. The 19th became a legion that left behind among the least casualties in their conquests, aided in this by increasingly powerful and rare technology, much of it passed through their hands before ever making it to Mars. This also aided in preserving the Raven Guard's numbers, which by the time of the betrayal exceeded 130,000 despite Corax being the last of the known Primarches to be found. Nonetheless, due to the Legion's secrecy, it maintained a dark reputation among much of the Imperium, which Corax was only happy to exploit. When targeting the human Kalai Empire, centered on gas giant atmospheric cities, he ensured a decade-long low-level campaign of rumors about the Imperium, centered on the Raven Guard's fearsome reputation, as soon as he learned of the distant polity. When the Imperium's borders finally touched those of Kalai, it surrendered after a false sighting of Corax in the planetary capital. As a side effect, 3 petty empires bordering Kalai surrendered soon after rather than face the Raven Guard in combat. Against the orcs of the Genat sector, meanwhile, Corax managed the impressive feat of starving the chief space rock of the Xenos, by stranding it in space and using stasis mechanisms to end it, while surgical strikes sent the rest of the Wa'ak into a long civil war by removing essential leaders, allowing a small force of Raven Guard under Alvarex Mon to bleed them dry. Within the Legion, though, Corax was faced with a dilemma. His sons were gen-engineered to obey him, which he despised, but at the same time, often, for the Terran legionnaires in particular, that compulsion was the ultimate reason that they did not continue to act as the monsters they had at times been. Even then, he often could not entirely trust them to operate alone. This preference for Deliverance-born legionnaires was noted, and led to some resentment among the Terrans. As to his brothers, Corax remained distant from them, as from much of the Imperium. He saw Guilliman and Magnus as potential tyrants, though oddly enough he seemed more or less neutral towards Kurs, perhaps feeling some kinship with the Night Haunter. Jagatai was his closest friend, perhaps because they were both distant from the main course of the crusade, and Jagatai, perhaps, was the only other Primarch Corax was willing to reveal his doubts to. Both toasted to knowledge and freedom, as well as to speed, in profound brotherhood. Corax's friendship with Mort Arian, meanwhile, was founded in a gruff respect. Neither bared their true face to the other, but both felt themselves similar under their mask. As to Horus and Fukin, they disagreed with Corax's basic beliefs. For the only foundations were knowledge and freedom, not abstract and unquantifiable humanity. Corax wrote much about his philosophy, but he refused to lie and claim that he was fundamentally the same as a common man or woman of the Imperium. It was his duty to ensure humanity would rise, and that meant that, like himself, the tech priests of Mars, or even the Raven Guard, they would not long remain precisely human. The Kievar Lyceus system became a test bed for such dreams. It became much like a Mechanicum Forge world, and indeed the Mechanicum had significant influence, but DOS, the Raven Guard, and the Omniscia as Shadow himself greatly contained that influence. Great spires rose from the surface of Kievar, with the planet itself moving close to peaceful anarchy. Self-modification, cybernetic and biological, was perhaps more widespread on Kievar than any other Imperial world, and certainly less restricted, which on 3 occasions led to the Raven Guard, themselves increasingly modifying themselves, though generally in minor ways so as to not interfere with combat efficiency, having to pacify their home. Yet though tech priests complained of chaos, Corax refused to tighten his grip. Until Betrayal came, and chaos acquired a new definition. The Great Betrayal. Corax was not Alpharius, to see treachery at every corner. Moreover, he was close to the Emperor, and readily shared those concerns about the Imperium he did have with his father, and he subconsciously assumed other Primarchs would do the same. Yet he had some advance warning of the betrayal nonetheless, from a number of machines that weakly violated causality, above all the vast sphere known as the Oracle of Elfinster. Corax did not believe that a rebellion of Astaroths was coming, but he was convinced that Terra would be threatened, and in preparation for that he called the Legion to the Forge world of Kavarasarda, as a rally point before Terra. The Legion came to his call, not all, but more than half the Raven Guard was gathered within weeks, for while the Legion had been spread out most of it remained in broadly the same region of the galaxy, near Kavarasarda but far from Terra. And with them came an engine that Corax was deeply wary of, Tuchulcha, found in the Perditus system by a Raven Guard expeditionary fleet. It was, as best as Corax understood, an artificial intelligence, one with some integration with the warp, something that made even the Omniscia as Shadow wary. But now he needed it, and so he communed with Tuchulcha, convincing it to transport the Raven Guard fleet to a point near the Sol system. For all but one ship, the transfer went perfectly. As to what precisely became of the exception, the cruiser Raptor, those who boarded it, including Corax, refused to discuss with any but the Emperor. Tuchulcha claimed that the Raptor became what it did due to the well-known random dangers of the warp. Yet Corax knew that suffering of that sort could not come about without malice. Nonetheless, Tuchulcha had done as it promised for the rest of the Legion, and so it was towed towards Sol with the main fleet, as Corax's flagship, the Shadow of the Emperor, charged ahead. What it found was a nightmare. Confused rumors of Istvan were already trickling in, but the main concern for now was with the system itself, with Mars, which had descended into civil war, and with Terra, whose catacombs the Emperor had descended into for classified reasons. In truth, Malkador told the Omniscia as Shadow, the Emperor was working on his Webway project, or more accurately sealing that work to ensure it could not be used against the Imperium. 30,000 Raven Guard descended onto Mars, and 40,000 onto Terra. Corax himself would join the sorely pressed Emperor and Custodes in the Webway. While the Imperium had expanded its reach within that realm, its Xeno and monster denizens had retreated from the light, but now that they sensed weakness, they came down in a tide, seeking to break through to the surface of Terra itself. Corax was on Terra for a local month before Guilliman and Fulgrim, and soon after them the First Fleet arrived. It felt like an eternity. But while he fought many monsters alongside his father, the worst of them the Emperor would face nearly alone, and suffer severe wounds in victory. The Emperor would have recovered eventually, but scarce days later, the First Fleet tore into the Sol system. Gareth Arendi gasped as he rounded the corner, and beheld his father kneeling over the body of the Emperor of Mankind. There was blood, that was the first thing he noticed. So much blood, red like any human's, he'd almost expected that the Emperor's blood would be golden as well. He's alive, Corax said without turning, though Arendi knew it was meant for him and Commander Alanai Tef. It was not as if there was anyone else it could have referred to. Tef turned back instantly, signaling with a silent nod that he was getting medical assistance, though whether any surgeon actually had the knowledge to operate on the Emperor was a different issue. Alive and conscious, the Emperor said, quietly but firmly, and with the same solemnity as ever, as Corax helped him into a sitting position. Constantine took the blow. It was his duty, but that does nothing to change the fact that I owe my life to him. Looking around, Arundi could not see the body of Captain General Konstantin Valder. A moment later, he realized why. A blow that could have killed the Emperor of Mankind would not have left anything of Valder to be recognized. But he could see something of the body of the enemy the Emperor had vanquished. Arundi took a couple of steps towards the silvery ooze that seemed to be the thing's corpse, before his Gene Father put out a black armored hand out to stop him. "It is not gone entirely, not yet," the Emperor said. "It will be soon, though. I had not thought there were any such monsters here, to be honest." "What weighs it?" Korax asked. The Emperor was silent for a long moment before replying. "A Cetan shard, a sort of Xeno abomination far more ancient than humanity, that had been tainted by the power of the warp. Not something I had considered possible." "Cetan." Korax mused, even as he worked to dress the Emperor's wounds. Arundi did his best to remain on the lookout, even though he knew that any danger would probably be noticed by Korax first. "I do no more, though the matter is of little relevance at present," the Emperor said. "But that is knowledge you may seek out on your own. There is some knowledge, Corvus, that you must not." There was a moment of silence, black silence that seemed to stretch like the expanse between the stars, where a ship might drift for billions of years without being noticed by a single soul. "Chaos," Korax eventually and immediately said, and Arundi could not help but feel that this was a conversation he should not be present for. But neither the Emperor nor the Shadow made the slightest gesture for him to leave, and so he remained, watchful yet unable to turn his hearing away from the demigod's speech. "You speak of chaos." "I do," the Emperor said. "Some knowledge is dangerous, even to us. Chaos corrupts, even as merely a concept." Korax frowned, the darkness seeming to stretch towards an intergalactic void, a silence unblemished by anything except the whiz of photons from fires millions of years old. "When I tried to destroy Duchalcha, as you advised, it fled with ease, and I have no doubt that I will have to face it in battle in future years. Perhaps that was better than the alternative, but I have no way to be sure. For an engine, that is unfortunate. For our final enemy, it is unacceptable. One cannot fight chaos without understanding some of it," the Emperor admitted. "The same as for any foe. But you know full well I do not speak of this." Arundi didn't, but he was fairly sure he had already been forgotten. "I am not Magnus," Korax said. "My path is not the Psyker's. And yet you already know your paths will intersect before the end." Darkness again, and by now Arundi was sure it was not merely in his imagination. Darkness that did not recede even as the omniscious Shadow spoke. "I will not stop," he said, voice almost breaking. "I do not think I can stop. But I will slow down, and I will bid my legion to do the same. Because we only have one chance, and because perhaps it is no longer a race." Dorn's fleet headed straight for Terra, dropping only nominal reinforcements to the Martian rebels, who were led by Fabricator General Kulberhal himself. But though the Raven Guard under Agapeto Nev had by far the greatest numbers of Asteroids on Mars, the campaign was anything but easy. The combination of Mechanicum machinery and chaos corruption led to Kulberhal's faction posing a danger far greater than their numbers would imply. The Raven Guard who fought in the Martian Schism did, if nothing else, find that the campaign fit their tactics. It was a war of infiltration, rapid strikes, and singular technological artifacts. Yet it was also a war which set Imperial science back by no less than a millennium, due to the sheer scale of the destruction unleashed. And it was a war of nightmares, for while chaos had far less strength on Mars than on Terra, that strength was on the whole used far more creatively. On Terra, the Raven Guard fought a war they were rather less suited for, and with the Emperor's wounds, Korax was forced to spend much of his time completing the webway's sealing, leading to further uncertainty. Often the Raven Guard were seconded to formations of the War Master's legions, but in an awkward manner where they outnumbered the units they were supposed to cover. But they fought no less valiantly and no less cleverly for all of that. Above all, they launched lightning sallies to keep the traitors off balance. The greatest of these was also the first, as the Emperor himself charged the Salamander landing sites alongside Korax. But while the assault inflicted severe casualties and almost broke the Salamanders, it also saw the Emperor suffering yet another wound, this time from Fukin's infected hammer, which nearly entirely restricted him to the Imperial Palace. There were other raids after. Notably, Nikon Sharokin led an assault that sabotaged Jagatai Khan's prized armor, and later managed to snipe the Warhawk without being noticed to the extent of disabling him for a full day, but failed, perhaps expectedly, in killing the Primarch. Korax himself, despite the sundered friendship, expressed no desire for particular vengeance against Jagatai, treating the matter with sadness in place of any special hate. The Death Guard and Space Wolves provided respite for a time, but when the Second Fleet came, Terra was reduced to a siege once again. On Mars, even as Captain Verano Ebb killed the traitorous Fabricator General at the cost of his own life, Dark Mechanicum elements used the opportunity to flee the planet and join the traitor fleet, bolstering Lorgar's forces. Mars was secured, but the loyalists on it were stranded. Korax rushed to finish the matter of the webway between raids, Horus rushed towards Terra, and events rose towards a crescendo. Above all, in this time, the Raven Guard learned the true nature of chaos. Here was a dark power spawned from the warp, a power that twisted every ideal any sapient species ever had into a system that mocked it. And Kievar was not exempt from that corruption. Bran Nev, Agapito's brother, led the Legion elements stationed at the Raven's Pier, and he led what became known as the War of Deliverance against a chaos cult that had arisen on Kievar under the Raven Guard's notice. Its members were united by a nanite injection that ultimately turned them into shape-shifting monsters with minds mainly consumed by obsessive calculation of an increasing spiral that included the true names of summonable daemons. At least, that was the portion of the process that the Raven Guard could comprehend without losing their own sanity. The cult promised to be the only way to escape the Raven Guard's purge, offering deliverance from the suffering of the physical universe. Twisted mirrors of every concept. Freedom constrained to flow towards slavery. Knowledge that encourages the mind to forget. Endless suffering and endless struggle. That is what we now fight, yes. That is chaos. But I refuse to give up the Legion's principles merely because any principle can be corrupted. The tech guilds that ruled before Korax came, the slave masters my parents spoke of, even they would have been revolted by these ascenders. But to us, to those who fight tyrants, the difference is not so severe. The tech guilds were once founded for the right reasons, but in the end their iron hand made the world worse, as the Shadows' reforms proved. So it is here, people sought enlightenment, and found convenient darkness instead. So, perhaps, it was at the end of the Golden Age as well. We always knew that most of our enemies should always have been on our side, and whether it is the warp's influence or merely societal luck that leads them to dreary midnight, we must light a fire either way. Commander Bran Nev. As the Raven Guard fought this and other flames throughout the galaxy, events on Terra reached their desperate climax. As Korax closed the last chink in the webway, Ferrus Manus and Lorgar found a way into the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace, and Lorgar, Fulgrim, and the Emperor fell in a single day. The escape. With the Betrayal's conclusion, the Raven Guard, as well as the other legions on Terra, sought to prevent the traitors from escaping. Yet with Guilliman unconscious and Fulgrim dead, unity of command was somewhat unclear. In the end the broken forces of the First and Second Fleets successfully retreated, but were chased far away from Terra by the gathering might of the Imperium. Korax himself took on the task of driving the Iron Hands from their home world of Medusa, yet in this he failed. As the main fleet of the Raven Guard approached the system, the Iron Hands unleashed a ritual that created a massive warp storm. Only a quick reaction from Korax to activate an experimental Geller field variant prevented the loss of the fleet's bulk, but the Raven Guard still suffered severe losses, in men and in materiel. The disaster at Medusa, though, was balanced by numerous victories, such as at Yarant, and the Iron Hands soon descended into infighting anyhow. The greater blow, perhaps, was the conclusion of the War of Deliverance. The spiraling madness of the cultists was defeated, but at heavy cost. In the end, victory was achieved when Bran Nev led a strike team into the Raven's Pier, which had been taken over by the cultists, while Navar Heg, captured and brainwashed by the Ascenders, managed to hold on to something like sanity, and at the cost of his own life, break open a simultaneous breach in the subterranean and orbital fronts as well as disrupting a vast amount of summoning infrastructure. But Kievar was left in ruins, and so was the idealism of the Raven Guard. Even among the Legion itself, more than a few had fallen to the temptation of chaos. Many blamed this on human weakness, and even saw hubris in Bran Nev's continued belief in the imperial truth. It was Coryx's return that broke this melancholy. He spoke to the Legion, as lost as any of them, admitting, publicly, that he was not sure what the Legion should do. But he insisted, in the same breath, that uncertainty about means was not the same about ends, and that for a Legion as used to operating in the darkness and doing what was necessary as the Raven Guard, cynicism about ends would necessitate their fall. And regardless of precise formulation, the imperial truth said there were no gods, only the destined glory that was transhumanity. If that was not true, then they would make it so. The Raven Guard returned to battle at and beyond the front line, but they also took up Malcador's advice, naming engineering, to no one's surprise, as their non-combat calling. But their main partners in this work were becoming increasingly unreliable. The Martian Mechanicum was increasingly ruthless and obsessed with efficiency, while simultaneously sinking deeper and deeper into worship of the Omni's Saya. When Coryx looked at them, he was not sure if he saw incipient tech guilds or incipient chaos, but it did not matter. In the wake of Malcador's death, as uncertainty and dysfunction gripped the Imperium, Corvus Coryx appeared, unannounced, in the inner sanctum of Olympus Mons. From there, he proclaimed to the tech priests that he was assuming command of Mars, even as Alpharius did the same on Terra. There was fighting, as expected, but it was brief, for many on Mars preferred Coryx to Fabricator General Kane or else did not care. The Raven banner soared everywhere on Mars within days. The Legion, too, adopted an altered iconography. Iron was a symbol in disrepute after the betrayal, and Coryx was not iron anyhow, he was darker, and altogether more reactive. So it was that the White Raven of the 19th Legion was set against a gear of darkest blue, and its primarch became the Prince of Zinc. The Long War. In the centuries following the betrayal, as the Imperium expanded towards its earlier borders, the Raven Guard fought and built much like in the later years of the Great Crusade. This, for instance, marked the time when Coryx and Chief Apothecary Vincente VI led the project to invent the Eternal Pattern Dreadnought, and when the Ark was crafted to carry Horus Lupercal, with whom Coryx had long since made peace, out of the galaxy. In this time, too, the Mechanicum was reformed to be both more secular and less ruthlessly efficient. Nonetheless, with Horus gone, Fulgrim dead, and Magnus increasingly silent, Coryx found that the Imperium was stagnating, increasingly content with its status. Alpharius, Kurz, and Guilliman were all more concerned with the preservation of the Imperium than with making it something more. Coryx, meanwhile, became obsessed with something else entirely, setting his sights on understanding causality and its violations, for the sake of the distant and ultimate victory, because that victory was more important than anything of what led up to it. Until, on the last day of M31, an explosion rang out of the Raven's Pier centered at Coryx's workshop, and the Prince of Zinc vanished. The Raven Guard do not believe their Primarch is dead, there are devices that would have recorded that, but he has not reappeared since. Yet they have carried on, reorganizing under a triumvirate, stationed on Mars, Kiavar, and the Legion flagship. Over time, the distinction between the Legion and the Mechanicum has grown ever thinner, not so much in combat, for the Raven Guard do usually fight separately from Skitarii, as in mission. The Raven Guard are, however, warriors above all, and have achieved a long tally of triumphs. Among the most famous and most absolute are Vianid in 883.m33, which shattered the blood cults of the Iron Warriors, Perochas in 018.m36, against the Dark Eldar, or the vengeance of Voldorius on Quintus, in 871.m41, which stopped the raider armada of Corsaro Khan and, unusually, managed to recover many of the people and relics that had been taken. There have been major defeats too, among them the infamous three-way Baron War against the Orcs and Eldar, which fairly conclusively showed the ways in which psychic precognition remained superior to the technological kind. In general, the Raven Guard have a partially deserved reputation for unpredictability, achieving impossible shining victories but also suffering devastating defeats. With all due respect, Targus 8 was not a hopeless battle, Lord General. Were it hopeless, after all, we would not have won. But as to why, to save the people, of course. Sometimes billions will be lost to the tides of war, such is their nature. But we must also remember just how high the worth of even a single life is. How much even a single person can become, and even if you care not for that, how much they can contribute. As to your battle plans, we were hardly unaware of them. I ran hundreds of my own simulations, Lord General, as did Commander Severax. Your strong point was the most common point for the orcs to strike, but not by much. The strike might have come there, yet it could also have come at Donora, or at Yaki, or, as it did, through the Rinse Gap, but it was certain that Targus needed rescue, and so it was there that I chose to fight. Because regardless of strategy, the civilians and PDF that we saved are far from irrelevant in the calculus of war. Rather, they are the very answer to be maximized within it. Captain K. von Schreich, later promoted to commander of the Falcons. The Raven Guard have made countless contributions to the armament and the infrastructure of the Imperium as well. The pace of these advancements slowed significantly after Corix's loss, especially as it led to cascading increased worry about risks, but as of late cultural change has reversed this trend somewhat. More and more, the Raven Guard see the Imperium as, despite everything, a nation under siege, and, more and more, there is a resentment that over 10 millennia they have not managed to change that, have not even managed to surpass the glories of the golden age of technology. The path forward is difficult, and the dangers of a false step grim indeed, and even the augmented minds of the Legion's triumvirs wonder if they have been walking it too slowly, if the Imperium is out of time. But the Imperium does not seem to be doomed, not yet, and while it is not, there will be hope to find in its shadows, hope that, when the dust has settled, humanity's legacy will weep at even the evil that the Raven Guard themselves, today, do without noticing, and that they will breathe easily as they enter a future with no more monsters in the dark. Organization. Since Corix has departed, the numbers of the Raven Guard have remained somewhat low for an Imperial Legion, a matter not assisted by a trend of genetic instability, which experimentation has on net had a slightly negative effect on. At present, they number perhaps 135,000. The Legion is led by the Triumvirs, but operational command falls to the 19 commanders, each of which leads a division named after a species of bird. Each division is divided into 10 unkindnesses led by directors, these are divided into 10 wings each, led by captains. Each wing contains either 13 or 15 squads of 5 asteroids each, depending on division tradition. Due to the significance leeway the divisions have, and the traditions that have evolved in each over the millennia, there are often slight deviations from this model. The most prominent are specialist formations, which are typically subordinate directly to commanders, except among the owls, hawks, and pelicans, where they report to directors. There is a deep history of such formations, as well as considerable fluidity. The most successful among them have been adopted legion-wide. These include the Moritati, broken warriors who fight with suicidal fervor as shock troops, the Wardens, who travel alone outside the borders of the Imperium, the Shadow Masters, who inherited Corix's ability to shadow walk, and above all the portion of the dedicated armored and air forces of the Legion that operates multi-astart machinery, vehicles, and artillery both. The matter of psychers in the Raven Guard is threaded with distrust. This is not to say that the Raven Guard are reticent to serve alongside them, but the nature of the Legion is to look deeper into all mysteries, and with psychic mysteries, doing so is profoundly dangerous. The Raven Guard use Psytech only in limited amounts, and seek to limit recruitment of psychers, known constants such as shadow walking aside. Those psychers that slip through typically train with another legion, almost always the Thousand Sons, and hold no special rank, though by the same token they can rise through the ranks like any Astart, and some have in the past served as triumvirs. While Legion Command and Mechanicum Command have significant overlap at the highest levels, at lower levels the biggest overlap concerns the Legion's gene seed, which is not exclusively maintained by Asteroutes. Indeed, the role fulfilled by other Legion's Apothecarian is often instead performed by attached Mechanicus adepts. The Legion does not maintain an official hierarchy in its non-combat pursuits, judging such a hierarchy as counterproductive as well as distasteful, except for new recruits who have not completed their basic hypno training. It is emphasized that good ideas can come from anyone in the Legion, or indeed outside it, and that the same is true of misconceptions. At the same time, while combat organization retains some fluidity, the need for efficiency often takes priority there. Combat doctrine. The Raven Guard traditionally emphasize stealth and speed. While they do not seek open battle, they are not the Alpha Legion. Their way is a large number of small skirmishes, not, usually, bloodless conquest. When it does come to battle, they again favor mobility, particularly jet bikes and single-pilot gunships. They adopt a similar doctrine in the Void, with their Legion fleet being composed of relatively small and fast craft that make a point of hiding significantly variable capabilities under similar appearances. If they do deploy large quantities of armor, it is usually in a concentrated fashion, forcing a decisive battle with Titan-scale weaponry. It is not uncommon, of course, for such deployment to be in part a distraction, for the Raven Guard understand that a war should be resolved in some fashion other than the direct clash of arms whenever possible. The Sanctum was silent save for the single stream of water, just barely fast enough to not be a drip, along the side of the wall, a legacy of the recent rains. Below the alcove, the fortress walls dropped into the vast underworld of Kelth. Captain Ethon Sean looked down from the ledge, taking in the seeming sinkhole. It had its origin in an orbital bombardment millennia ago, Gilliman had said. Gilliman. Primarch and War Master. Some part of Sean was still in awe at his presence, at the fact that even now he was surely fighting in the depths. Most of his mind, though, was focused on the task at hand. He pressed a few buttons on his helmet, injecting another dose of the drug, gamma polymorphiluron it was supposedly called, into his system. He knew having so much GPU was, at the moment, potentially dangerous. GPU augmented neuroplasticity, when dealing with someone like Vaughn's, that could be a method of corruption. But ultimately, the risk was necessary, as so many risks were. He needed to understand Vaughn's. He checked the simulations again. They were still useless, though. Too convergent, too sure of an Imperial victory. It meant that they still didn't know what Hansa was really after. As Sean leapt from the ledge, hoverpack silently activating, he used his free left hand to massage his fifth lobe, which had only recently received a nanite refreshment. The flight trajectory was easy enough to plot, he could have devoted it to implanted instinct, of course, but he enjoyed being conscious of how he flew. And it was vitally important, to be aware of the processes of one's own mind. He streaked through the sky, opening his wings only as he approached the ledge, a kilometer below his previous location, that held the prison entrance. Multiple security checks, but it was easier to get into the quarantine than out of it. He would not see another living soul for hours after this interrogation was concluded. And then it was only an isolated cogitator that separated him from Ethon Vaughn's. Ethon, the prisoner's voice said, and it was Vaughn's voice, no matter that the machine ensured the sound was entirely neutral. You flatter me with the security. Arderic Vaughn's, Sean greeted the former director. Why did you surrender? He knew Vaughn's could hear nothing of his intonation unless he had gotten into the cog, and in that case he had bigger problems than whether Vaughn's could recognize his uncertainty. But for all of that, he was embarrassed by the way his voice trembled. The truth was, this was a mystery, and for all that Asteroutes were supposed to feel no fear, and perhaps that was true of unaugmented Asteroutes, Sean was terrified of what he was going to find at its end. Not that this could prevent him from searching for that end. Why would I not? Because you knew full well you would be thrown into a cell like this. There was silence for a long time. Minutes, in fact. He didn't believe that interrupting it would achieve anything. Every word he said gave Vaughn's more information, after all. The restraints have been less than pleasant, it is true, Vaughn's eventually said. Frankly, I had hoped you would kill me. Why? Why not? And something within Sean cracked. Maybe it was just the dispassionate way the artificial voice said it, as if suicide was simply one more sensible option. Because the entire Legion does not. Why run to chaos, turn on everything you once stood for, and now embrace self-destruction? You cannot pretend this is the default, Vaughn's. You cannot pretend it is normal. I know you made an error in your augmentations, but that is all I have been told. All anyone in the 19th knew, actually, as best as Sean could tell. Ah. A pause. I did not make an error, Ethon. I merely entered truly correct algorithms of scale. Another pause. Do you know, really, the forces arrayed against you? The Imperium is a bubble of foam on of the sea of reality. Pause. The warp we know is merely one of nearly infinite reflections. Do you understand what that means, Ethon? For our chances. We always knew the odds were long. As he spoke, Sean considered the implications, both of Vaughn's claim and of the rhythm of his speech. Knew, but did not understand. Pause, almost infinitesimal, but a pause nonetheless. I understood, and yet I kept fighting. One cannot defeat chaos by fearing it. Why suicide? Because I am tired. Pause, the computer was sending nothing. A regular rhythm. Because I know too much to control the warp. Because I am too free to. Vaughn's voice cut out as Sean drove a fist into the cogitator, and the torture device beyond. As he suspected, there was nothing there. How Vaughn's had managed to escape, Sean did not know. Reprogramming the cogitator, that would have been easy by comparison. The rhythm might have matched a sentry gun or some such, it certainly wasn't consistent with the simple text-to-speech algorithm that he should have been using. Where are you? Sean asked, hoping to taunt the renegade, at least slightly. Walking to my doom, Vaughn's said. You know the coordinates. I will have true death, Sean, which is more than you'll ever get. As to what Hansa wants, it's a distraction, of course. For what, I cannot say. He couldn't be sure, but that, had Vaughn's genuinely returned to their side? What did you see, brother? Sean asked. The connection snapped shut, with an angry crack of static that caused Sean to whirl around. He was not looking forward to returning through the quarantine, but it would be better to miss the decisive battle of this campaign than to avoid it and cast doubt on everything he had ever done. Necessary martial inflexibility and all that. But before he did, he bent down to look at the connecting cable, one of those that should have held Sean in place. A torn-out eyeball, colored the utter black of the Raven Guard, stared back at him. We will win, Vaughn's, Sean said to the empty room and the detached eye, but mostly to himself. Don't you see? The universe is horrifying, we all know that. Yet horror is not evil, and humanity's children can yet become the greatest horror of them all. In offensive warfare, the Raven Guard will operate under, generally, one of two doctrines, dependent on the scale of the conflict. Often, they will merely send a relatively small strike team to secure some specific objective. But when they lead a full-scale invasion, the ground trembles with the passing of their engines. The enemy's lines of supply and communication are disrupted as much as possible, ideally rendering them barely able to fight, and, meanwhile, those strongholds with the ability to hold out nevertheless are stormed, sequentially, by overwhelming power, ideally after their defenses have been drawn out. The Raven Guard seem to be everywhere, and the enemy is reduced to blind defiance at most. In defense, there is likewise an emphasis on interfering with the enemy's ability to wage productive war. But there is also a more general emphasis on guerrilla warfare, of allowing the enemy to achieve an apparent victory while laying the foundation to retake the world from within. It is perhaps for this reason that Raven Guard military technology tends to emphasize self-sufficiency to an extent that surprises some observers. When defending truly essential worlds, though, the Raven Guard tend to use a static defense instead, with the same disruptive and unpredictable strikes coming from a besieged center. At the heart of this is an admission of the strategic lesson of Terra: while losing a battle can in many cases allow one to win a war, in some cases humanity truly cannot afford to take one step back. Homeworld. Kievar is the second most important forge world of the Mechanicum, and in many ways a political counterweight to Mars, espousing a less conservative version of Mechanicum doctrine and greater integration into the Imperium at large. Great complexes of metal, ceramics, and composites rise from its surface, the largest ones actually leading to Kievar being, overall, as near a dodecahedron as a sphere. While many citizens of Kievar live their entire lives without seeing the surface, the archaeology of the planet is far from being an industrial catacomb, great voids within, to which the light of distant suns is transmitted via fexnit quasi-fibers, are lined by stalactitic and stalagmitic towers, atop which gardens stretch to the unreachable centers. These voids, too, are ever filled by birdsong, though this detail is not everywhere a convenience, as the Kievar variety of the Legion's symbol has a distinctly discordant voice. In the unseen skies, connected mainly by teleportation and rail shuttles, Lycius is much like a smaller version of its parent, save for the silent needle pointing directly away from Kievar, the Raven's Pier, the central sanctum of the 19th. Kievar is ruled by the Raven Guard, or perhaps by its Council of Forge Masters, which is composed mainly of Raven Guard. It's hard to tell, sometimes. In truth, the planet's people are mainly left to their own devices, though far less so than before the betrayal. The main functions the government does perform relate to coordinating infrastructure maintenance, and, more dramatically, to shattering societal cancers, that is, organizations whose work hurts Kievar. First among them are chaos and other cults. Beliefs. The Raven Guard believe fervently in the imperial truth, but as an aspiration, not as a description. To them, the universe is not merely unjust, it is fundamentally anti-just, as symbolized by chaos. They have been described as pessimists, but at the same time their fundamental belief in the yet unfulfilled potential of humanity is as extreme as any legions. The Raven Guard do not consider themselves human, though, the more important distinction, to them, is that they are imperial. Technology is seen as less something to celebrate in itself and more as a means to an end, or, rather, as the only means to the only meaningful end. While the Raven Guard make up among the least spiritual elements of the Mechanicum, they do have a fair bit of respect for machine spirits, and for the use of symbols as inspiration. In some cases these beliefs trend to collapse. The Raven Guard have the unwanted distinction of being the Imperial Legion with, historically, the largest proportion of traitors. In the end, the Raven Guard's aims have been passed down from Korax, to maximize knowledge and freedom, for every descendant of Earth. Those aims, the Legion pursues through any means necessary, which to outsiders can look sometimes like callousness and sometimes like naivete, and the Legion does not particularly feel the need to explain themselves to those outsiders, especially outsiders who are not clearly equals. But if they are seen as mavericks by governors, that very trait has made also some of their leaders folk heroes, as with Director Aoiz the Gambler Solari. For the Legion's loyalty to the Imperium, and its consequent duty, lies at the foundation of all that it collectively is. Gene Seed. The Raven Guard have the most ability to mass-produce gene seed of any Imperial Legion, and that is a very fortunate thing, as they also have the most unstable gene seed of any Imperial Legion, as, though the Space Wolves and Thousand Suns gene seed is more deviant, it is not unpredictably so. Incautious experimentation in the wake of Korax's disappearance is blamed for this, as is enemy action, but a low yield rate is recorded from the time of the Great Crusade. Nonetheless, the history of mutation has also led to strict controls. Modern Raven Guard rarely exhibit any sign of mutation except the melanchromic organ's tendency to create pure white skin and pure black eyes, and the occasional inheritance of some of Korax's psychic abilities. The Raven Guard modify their gene seed very sparingly, but individual augmentations are almost universal. Cybernetic and biological modifications are similar to those found in the rest of the Mechanicum, but the Legion is especially distinguished by a penchant for mental augmentations, a topic approached with special caution, but also special appreciation for the possibilities it opens. Battle Cry. The Raven Guard often fight without a battle cry, and when they do use one it is often something generically imperial, such as, for the Emperor. But it may also be the Legion's High Gothic motto, ad infinitum. 999.m41. The black tower of the Raven's Pier rose from a forest of forced domes. In the skies above, lightless above the absent atmosphere, Corvus Corax could see the stars of the Raven Guard's fleet, guns built thousands of years ago monitoring the borders of the system for the coming orc attack. Below, the heavy bolters guarding the Raven's Pier were loaded, the Raven Guard, Astarte and Primaris alike, holding position. Before him, on the parapet, a figure in white and black armor knelt before him. "Rise," Corax said. "You know full well that I am not your Corax." "Which still puzzles me," Chapter Master K. von Schreich admitted. "Yet, even aside from the lives you saved on Fief, you are still a version of Corax, and the closest thing to my Primarch I am likely to see in my lifetime. If you were revealed, there would be a frenzy," Corax acknowledged. "Which is exactly why I must not be revealed, especially since I must now leave. But I do not think it unlikely that you will live to see your version of Corax. There is not so much time left for your universe. And your Imperium too will rise to meet the fall of Kadaya. Things are not as hopeless as they seem. To be sure, this Imperium was a rotting carcass when compared to what Corax had left behind, but appearances could be deceiving. Corax only hoped that the Imperial truth had not been forgotten in his home universe as it had here, that progress and understanding had not come to a halt. His sons should have been able to manage on their own, and the same was true of the 5 Primarchs he'd left behind. But he still worried, sometimes. "Yes, my lord," Shrike said. "Yet it is not enough to hope." "No, it is not," Corax acknowledged. "You have to fight. Yet I see that your will to do so, to stand against the Imperium's enemies is undimmed. As I take my leave, remember this, and in the battles to come, remember to not merely survive, but to keep striving for the Imperial dream." "I swear I will, Lord," Shrike said, as Corax spun his compass and departed this universe for another parallel. He had seen so many, over the millennia he had spent in eternal war. Variation upon variation on the Emperor, the Xenos, the Primarchs, and Asteroutes, and more distant allies and threats and realms that had had no analogue in his original timeline. Variations, even, on the gods of chaos, though there were always also commonalities. Variations upon himself and his sons. Even now, after all the horrors he had witnessed the Raven Guard become, he was not immune to the agony of dark mirrors. It was a relief that the 19th had been loyal, in this universe. And in all of it, his path led ever forward, never allowing him to return to the Raven's Pier he knew or even to create a new home, for all that this project had been meant to gather knowledge of causality precisely to help the Kievar he knew. But he knew it was different, now. He could feel the side shifts of his infinite dimensional road lead back home, within only a few more jumps. Because the end times were here, and doubts notwithstanding, he expected that the Imperium would be ready, in one fashion or another. As reality shards flashed around him and the scant, albeit wondrous, gear that he could carry on this passage, the scale of them threatened to take his breath away, in this moment, as they always did. The scale, for that matter, of the enemy. And to ward that away, as he often did in these fractured moments, he touched the shoulder of his armor and read the oath of moment he had attached to it, millennia ago, when he had first accepted that he was lost. He did not speak it aloud, indeed in this state he could not, but still this was more than merely reciting it in his mind. It was intermediate, just as, for now, he was still intermediate between the Corax who had left and the Corax that would return. It was intermediate, as all things were intermediate here. But that did not mean it wasn't real. Though my victories be fleeting, still I swear to keep on meeting dawn with truth, no matter what the coming day may hold in store. And continue fighting, dreaming, till mankind once more is gleaming. Actual good through hopes is streaming, no one needs to flee from lore. And the fates that made a multiverse turn rotten at the core stand triumphant. Nevermore. Check the description for the links to the author.